The Journey, Part 1. At 8:40, Crean appeared by the door of Central Station. Then Jop arrived, with the Cordozo boys. From different parts of the station, the young men slowly gathered at the meeting place. At 8:50, Jop took a head count. Everyone was there. He passed out the tickets and led the group toward their platform. Jop noticed that they stood out more than he had anticipated. There were no other large groups of passengers in plain clothes. "Halt!" shouted a German security policeman from a distance. He motioned for Jop to come toward him. The group stopped in their tracks. "Papers, please," he said in German. Jop produced his ID card, travel permit, and the all-important permit for transporting labor groups. The German studied them. "You're the first leader of this type that I've seen here. They're so hard up for men in France?" "I think so, sir," said Jop confidently. "They are adding on more and more as the project grows." "Very well," he said, handing Jop's papers back to him. "I suppose I'll be seeing more of you here then." "Most likely. Good day," said Jop, turning away. "Just a minute," said another voice. A Dutch cop came forward. "You're Penrot, right, aren't you?" Jop nodded, held out his papers. "Sergeant Klempner." "Sergeant Herman Klempner," he said. "Herman," said Jop. "Small world. Small town, anyway." "I said that to you years ago, as I recall," he said, looking through Jop's papers. "What is all this?" "I've been hired to lead a work crew to their job site in France. I am the transport Führer for Organization TOT." "TOT is a state-run organization," said Herman. "You're telling me you're not now working for the Third Reich?" "My German colleagues know everything about my past. Obviously, I wouldn't have this job if they didn't trust me now. So if there's nothing further—" "Papers, let me see there." The train whistle blew. Jop signals for his men to get on board. Then he turned back to Herman. "Nice to see you again, Kempner," said Jop, jumping on the steps out of the train. "Perhaps we'll see more of each other now that we're on the same team. Auf Wiedersehen." "Penrot," shouted Herman, jogging alongside the department train. "I've got my eye on you." Jop scrambled up the steps and began to search for seats. The car was divided into 12 compartments, each with 6 seats. They had found seats for almost everyone when a problem erupted. The last 3 seats in the entire car were in a compartment already occupied by 3 Nazi officers. Nathan, Sam, and Max stood by the doorway, but the Nazis refused to let them enter. "This is a private compartment. Out!" the Nazis shouted in German. "Excuse me, sir, but we are assigned 22 seats in this car," said Jop quickly, "and since all others are taken—" "Out! No foreigners in here. Can't you see this is an officer's compartment? You idiot!" screamed the angriest German. "Get these urchins out of my sight. We are officers of the Third Reich. You do not want to irritate us." "Of course not, sir," said Jop, "but this is not a military train. We have our orders also." The Nazi's face reddened with fury. "You have 5 seconds to leave my sight," he snarled. "Out!" Jop turned to the boys and gestured for them to stand in the corridor. He disappeared and returned several minutes later with a huge Nazi wearing a shiny helmet and a silver breastplate. The Zugstreif was the master of the train. "These are my men, Herr Commandant," said Jop. The trainmaster checked their tickets and papers. "They have important work to do," Jop continued. "Completing the Atlantic Wall is top priority. No one knows where or when the enemy will invade. The future of the Third Reich may depend on their work." The trainmaster stepped into the compartment with the other Germans. Their exchange began politely, but as it grew more heated, he slid the door shut. Suddenly, it slid open again, and the most irate Nazi stood in the doorway, glaring at Jop. He flicked his cigarette ashes, then turned and strode down the corridor, followed by his 2 cronies. The trainmaster then gestured toward the empty seat and left. "I guess we had the bigger Nazi," whispered Jop. The 3 boys cautiously sat down at their seats where the Nazis had been, then looked at each other and laughed. "Robbie Schulman would be so proud," said Max. For the next few hours, the boys rehearsed details of their new lives. Jop had coached them to keep their stories simple. Ben Cohen, who was now Hans Bacher, planned to say he was a bricklayer. Nathan, Sam, and Max would say they were orphans old enough to make their own way in the world. No one knew what would be asked, but they were certain their lives depended on their answers. The train came to a halt at the Belgian border. Every passenger was required to step off and join a line, filing into the customs office. Jaap and Kreen gathered their men in a single file behind them and waited their turn. Passing between the armed guards, Jaap entered the office alone, presented his papers to the customs officer. They had not heard of anyone being called a transport Führer, and took some time inspecting the document. Jaap tried not to think of what would happen if they rejected his papers. There was no plan B, no escape route from this point. He pictured the customs officers getting a medal for catching them. When he heard the sound of a rubber stamp hitting the paper, Jaap quietly exhaled. The boys filed through the office as Jaap and Kreen stood nearby, enjoying the repeated thump of the stamp hitting the 20 false transit papers. Back on board, the boys stared at the new stamp marks, barely believing what they had just done. The train was now in Belgium. Before reaching Brussels, the train slowed down near a bridge. Another checkpoint? Asked Sam. I don't think so, Jaap said. They're looking for landmines or loosened bolts. The Belgian underground does its job well. Most of the train sabotage is done by former railroad men. How do the Germans know when they found all the bombs? Asked the boy. The train doesn't blow up, said Jaap. Sam was quiet after that. At approximately 3 a.m., they arrived in Brussels. Germans came through the train, checking papers again. Jaap looked around at his sleepy crew and feared this would be the time when someone would make a slip. The Nazis glanced at a few papers, but then left them alone. As soon as the train pulled away from the station, the boys were whispering again. The sleep was as false as their ID cards. They're catching on, Jaap thought. The train slowed several more times as it was crossing the plains of Flanders. The boys were becoming used to it when shots rang out in the distance, and then shouting in German. Everyone in Jaap's compartment sat up and looked at each other. All right, that's where we're stopping for today.